And once again, I'm joined by Dan. Welcome, Dan. Today, we're going to be discussing Azure Synapse and in the context of Microsoft Fabric and making that move away from that standalone product and ensuring there is a smooth migration. So, Dan, why would organizations want to migrate away from Synapse to Microsoft Fabric?
I think first off, there's probably a couple of simple answers to this question, which is the direction of travel in which Microsoft are going. So Microsoft Fabric is very much a consolidation of tools that users may be aware of and are using today. So such as Azure Data Factory, Synapse pipelines, or dedicated SQL pools. There's lots of Spark notebooks, for instance, or they might be using Databricks within that. So it's probably worth noting that Databricks here is unaffected. It's more the Synapse element that we're looking at. A lot of those services are pay-as-you-go, not pay-as-you-go, but they're sort of consumption-based models. So often, some of those elements like a dedicated SQL pool in Synapse can be quite expensive. So there is that cost efficiency. And I guess with Fabric as well, it consolidates that all together. So you've got a simplified data management portfolio and a unified data estate. OneLake in particular has a lot of benefits in terms of, capability to bring in Dynamics data if you've got that, data from external clouds, mirroring shortcuts is probably what I'm referring to there. So you've got extra capabilities outside of what you've already got, within the traditional services, like having a data lake and then using that in a Delta Lake format with Synapse and then consuming that. And the cost element of that as well is with Fabric, it's a, capacity-based product versus a consumption-based product. And by that, I mean, you don't go, you pay for a capacity, you use what's within that capacity, and you can scale up, you can scale down outside of reserved instances, obviously. But with the consumption-based model, you can very quickly incur some very significant costs if not designed properly, and obviously they can be quite expensive. So there's a couple of elements, but really it's Microsoft are consolidating this platform into the tools that are widely used today with extra capabilities and benefits.
Okay, so this sounds similar to our previous episode where we discussed how Microsoft are deprecating a SKU for Power BI where it's a standalone in favor of platform-based SKUs. And it sounds like this is related to that overall direction of travel where Microsoft are investing in the platforms and trying to steer people onto those platforms. And obviously it sounds like there's some commercial advantages or certainly potential for organizations to do so. So given that might be a significant improvement in terms of moving away from a standalone product to what could potentially be a more cost-effective platform with a much broader set of capabilities, what are the things that organizations should consider on this migration journey?
First and foremost, assess your current environment. So look at what you're using, the workloads, understanding the compatibility, because Fabric is it's worth noting that Fabric is fairly new. I think it's been out for general availability for just over a year now. So lots more features are getting added. So there are not feature parity between Synapse and Fabric just yet, but it is worth noting that a lot of those features have been added in now. There is an extensive roadmap and there's, weekly updates to Fabric. So an aggressive timeline to get there. And it's probably worth noting, things around Synapse dedicated SQL pools. How are you going to use that, in Fabric? Are you going to use the warehouse functionality, or are you going to use that rehost, sort of lift and shift, rehost or refactor approach, really? So yes, you can, migrate some of this across. And Microsoft are doing, similar like they are with Power BI. They're doing, migration roadmaps for the different elements. So like Data Factory, for instance, Fabric have announced that you can now run existing Azure Data Factory pipelines in your Fabric. So rather than rewrite them, you can just use the same one. But what you've probably got there is you're consuming, eventually it will be better to just obviously lift and get it all in the capacity. But for ease of migration, there is migration paths that you can look at for the different services. Microsoft, if you're using Power BI, I've got some migrations where you can obviously set up Fabric workspaces, migrate them across. For Spark-based workloads, you can look at, whether you, again, it's that rehost, whether you want to copy those notebooks across into Fabric, or whether you want to re-platform how you build those particular ETL and data processing pipelines.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, one of the things I see more and more is I used to spend a lot of time talking to customers about migrating to the cloud, but the number of people that I'm having those conversations are going down because they've already migrated to the cloud. But what I see is organizations effectively consuming cloud as an alternative infrastructure platform, an alternative to an on-prem VMware. But when I go and engage with much more agile modern organizations, so for example, I've worked with the majority of the high street banks who have a large amount of traditional infrastructure. But then I've also worked extensively with the digital banks in and around London, the Monzos, the Metros, the funding circles. And what we see within those organizations is they have very little in the way of traditional infrastructure. They're all sort of using cloud native technologies. They're moving up the cloud stack away from that infrastructure, consuming platforms and generating a whole load of significant benefit from the consumption of those versus a traditional infrastructure, so they can operate more lean. So as well as the advantage they've got without having to maintain a high street presence, they also have an operational efficiency because they are delivering with cloud native infrastructure that was far more cost effective than, say, legacy organizations. So how about you? How do you see the benefits of Fabric to organizations?
I think first and foremost, total cost of ownership. Having it as a SaaS-based product versus a PaaS-based product, and I think we sort of alluded to there earlier on with the first question, consumption-based versus capacity-based really does help around the cost and having a set cost, for what you're paying for. But equally around that, it's an integrated analytics platform. So those services are integrated together. You also get the extra capability. It helps get you on that journey to be AI ready. Fabric has some sort of data science capabilities and real-time data processing capabilities included within, as part of the box, out the box, shall I say. But so it helps simplify your architecture. It also got that scalability as well. Going from an F8 SKU to an F16 is relatively seamless. You go to the portal, you can sort of upscale, and again, it's demand processing. So you've got that, but it's also that future needs as well in being future ready around AI in particular. So, Copilot, with an F64 SKU is included, but equally, you can embed some of those AI and Gen AI and AI services that Microsoft have outside of Fabric, and it integrates very nicely as well as with some of the other services like Microsoft Teams and so forth. So lots of integration with some of the Microsoft ecosystem as well.
And that's something I can echo that from my personal experience. I spend a lot of time developing various AI solutions, and actually to get them working effectively, if there is a problem, it's nearly always related to the underlying data. So I quite often just use the free tier within Fabric to be able to connect to my data, transform, make it, ensure it has the quality, and then I can use Synapse to perform certain functions, certain analytics. But what I end up with is a data set that is highly usable for an AI scenario. So you're effectively pipelining data to a point that it has really good business value for AI use cases. As you say, that adoption side of things, that integration with AI models is quite seamless. And the other thing I think with Fabric is the speed of innovation versus a traditional, if you like, let's say you have an on-prem static analytics platform. The speed of innovation for that will be relatively slow, but the amount of change and improvement is, the updates are monthly to the Fabric platform, and the roadmap is published as well for all the additional features they've got going on there. So the speed of innovation to get even more value out of an existing platform increases over time. So yeah, I agree that Fabric is the way forward, because I think its holistic approach and the value proposition it offers is significantly better than just a siloed offering. So when it comes to technical considerations, are there any adjustments in skills, or is there anything organizations should be prepared for as they shift from a standalone siloed product like Synapse and moving towards Fabric?
Yeah, I guess to answer the question first, I mean, lots of businesses have SQL skills in-house. The amount of customers that we've probably both spoken to where, they're still using SQL Server databases, or they're using, SQL-based skills within sort of modern applications or modern platforms like Synapse, for instance, like, the SQL Serverless within Fabric as an example. There's the equivalent now in Lakehouse. What Microsoft has done in particular is really extend the modern services with backward compatibility. I say backward compatibility, it's not a backward step, it's just a lot of the newer services are by default use Spark or Python notebooks and are written in that way. So, but they obviously appreciate there's a learning curve. So to try and mitigate that learning curve, they've also made it compatible with, SQL where possible. So you can write SQL notebooks in a way that would still do the same job as a Spark notebook. Not identical, but it gives it, similar experience from there. And the tools as well, like Azure Data Factory, these are tools that are familiar. Users would have consumed these tools, whether it was in, I suppose in their first infancy around SSIS way back when, and then it's been, modeled and redesigned into Azure Data Factory, and then into, well, it's still Azure Data Factory, but within Microsoft Fabric. So there's a lot of continuity with skills and tools that people would have used previously, maybe in an on-prem scenario with SQL Server all the way through to today. So it's just, yes, there is, to maximize the use of Fabric, you may need to look at Spark and Python notebooks if you wanted to extend some of that. There's also a lot of low-code, no-code options as well. So pre-built AI models, machine learning models. Yeah, there will probably be some initial adjustments. However, the transition should be relatively straightforward, especially with the compatibility with SQL workloads, existing tools that may already be utilized in an organization like Azure Data Factory, SQL Serverless, etc. So the transition should be relatively straightforward, but it is worth, as we sort of mentioned earlier, making sure that an assessment of the workloads and equally the skills within the team, so the operating model is fully, reviewed under that case as well.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Excuse me. Obviously I do a lot of AI work, and AI is probably the language that underpins AI more than anything else is Python. Now, I don't have any coding skills, but AI knows Python extremely well. So what I've been able to do is build out pipelines and within Fabric, and then present that and connect that, say, to a website that is then doing an API call to that storage within Fabric. And so now I've got like a pipeline that's dynamic, and so therefore I've got a website whose content is dynamic as that pipeline adjusts, and all of that being written and controlled by AI, because it's all Python based, and I don't have individual Python skills, but I understand the concepts and the processes involved, so I can manipulate an AI to go and give me the outcomes that I want. So I'm really pleased. I'm really happy that Python and those workbooks, those notebooks, I think that's something that is worth upskilling on, because I think I see more and more use of that. And in fact, a lot of the toolings and the platforms coming out, not just from Microsoft, but from other cloud providers, are whether it be Juniper notebooks or whatever, Jupyter notebooks, sorry, they're becoming more and more commonplace. So I agree with that. So what about business disruption side of things? Because obviously if there is a change going on, you've obviously said do your assessment and look at your skills, because yes, that is important. And whilst there isn't a ticking clock for this one, well, it's not an announced ticking clock, maybe silently ticking in the background. How can organizations make the change whilst not disrupting their overall business?
So yeah, in terms of migration, don't go big bang. Start small. Migrate those non-critical workloads first and foremost. Setting up a test environment. It's very easy at the moment to get a Microsoft trial license, or if you are that's if you want to do a proof of concept around some of the capability, or look at some of the functionality within Fabric. But if you are looking at migrating, then setting up a second, a Fabric sort of tenant, as it were, looking at them migrating those non-critical workloads. Start with small use cases and chunk it up. So, ingesting maybe 1 or 2 data sources in that are aligned to a non-critical workload, model, transform, and then do that end-to-end processing and validate that data processing capabilities. Because I think we sort of mentioned earlier as well that Fabric, is about a year old, and it's got an aggressive roadmap for new features coming out weekly, and you don't often go within too long without hearing the new updates of what's coming in. And you can look at the website that Microsoft have for all the different components under there that are going to be enhanced. But also Microsoft are bringing out tools around migration assessments, especially around dedicated SQL pools. I think that's a real big area in which businesses can save a lot of money, because dedicated SQL pools traditionally in Synapse would have been a very costly overhead. Having that as part of your capacity and being able to use that in a 24/7 manner versus on a consumption based, albeit if you've got reserved instances, you have that, but the cost comparison in both of those instances, it far wavers to Microsoft Fabric there. So definitely look at starting small to keep the business disruption minimal, and then test, validate, and then promote, and then sort of eventually have that scale of transitioning more into Fabric, and then decommissioning your Synapse or other services in conjunction with that as you migrate fully into a Microsoft Fabric environment.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Dan. That's really useful insights that you've shared there. So just to conclude, that for businesses looking to move away from Synapse to Fabric, we're looking at benefits in terms of flexibility, cost efficiency, and data unification. But as Dan says, look at starting small, look at taking single workloads, non-critical workloads, end to end. So I'm going to pause there, and I will see you on the next episode. Thank you.